Of Dr. John Bulman and his lovely wife, Sue. Dr. John may have delivered you, set your broken bones, or taken out the tonsils. Tully was very lucky to have the very talented doctor practice in our town. John Bulman grew up in England and followed in his father's footsteps to study medicine at the University of Edinburgh. Upon graduation in 1948, he commenced his residency at the King Edward Memorial Hospital, which was situated in the heart of London. It was here he met a pretty young nurse, Ursula Bride, known to all as Sue. 3 years later, they were married, but John was in the midst of another love affair. Queensland House was directly opposite the hospital where they both worked. John was going there on his breaks to read Queensland newspapers and to look through other publications on Queensland. He was convinced their future lay in North Queensland. He applied for and was granted the position of Assistant Medical Officer at the Innisfail Hospital. In 1957, he persuaded his young bride to pack up and move halfway across the world. They set sail for Melbourne, where John had a brother living. There they bought a car and started the long, arduous trip to North Queensland. His child bride, as he often referred to Sue, was feeling homesick and wondering where on earth he was taking her. Not long after arriving at the hospital, he was promoted to medical superintendent. The nursing staff was continually amazed at his medical knowledge, his expertise, and his surgical skills. For nearly 2 years, he was the only doctor at the hospital. He was constantly on call and extremely busy, but he was always accessible to his staff and patients. He never lost his sense of humour, which was one of his most enduring qualities. In 1963, he left the Innisfail Hospital to set up a private practice in Bryant Street, Tully. He was appointed the Government Medical Officer and performed all the post-mortems at the Tully Hospital morgue. Between our house calls and consultations at his practice, he also operated every Wednesday at the Tully Hospital. On top of this, he had private patients in the hospital who he visited before and after work. John delivered hundreds of babies at all times of the day and night. He also operated on a few animals. For the next 36 years, Dr. John, or Doc Bully, as he was affectionately known, cured people's ills, stitched their wounds, delivered their children, and mourned with them in the loss of their loved ones. There would be few families in this district who have not benefited from John Bulman's medical knowledge. He was often called upon to assist in tricky operations, especially if the hospital doctors did not feel competent enough. Many people recall an incident where a young girl had come off her horse, sustaining terrible head injuries. Nowadays, she would have been immediately transferred to Townsville. But in those days, she was solely treated at the Tully Hospital. Dr. John saw her in the ward and immediately, without delay, performed a craniotomy to remove the swelling from her brain, thus saving her life. He was a gifted surgeon. One patient tells the story of going into a hospital to have her fourth baby. When she awoke from anaesthetic, Not only had Dr. John delivered the baby by caesarean, but had taken out her appendix, referring these to be bothersome, and attended to her ingrown toenail. He was often seen with a white towel around his neck, as he found the humidity always uncomfortable. Sandals were his preferred footwear. He was a great patron to the RSL Club, Top Pub, Bottom Pub, Bowls Club, Railway Hotel, and Country Club. John got around. He often laughed at all the Butler Street consultations that he had had. John and Sue had two chosen children, Johnny and Fleur. They spent their childhood growing up in the Brannigan Street house where John and Sue loved to entertain. Sue was a snappy dresser and an excellent cook. She adored having company over. Her signature cocktail was called Elephant's Breath. I'm guessing it packed a punch. Sue's other talents were of a more artistic nature. She was an avid painter. She was a member of an art group with other talented ladies. They were once tutored by the well-known artist Noel Wood, whose studio was on Badara Island. Sue produced many works in oils and watercolours, which were exhibited and sold. Sue was deeply loved and admired by all who knew her. An animal lover, Sue always had dogs. Every afternoon, she would take them out to Jarrah Creek for a run. It was returning from one of these outings that Sue had a terrible car accident. Robert Mackay, a local, was called into the hospital as he was the only person in Tully whose blood type was compatible with Sue's. It saved her life. The Bulmans also had a 700-acre property on Jarrah Creek Road, now called Tully Gorge Road. This plot was standard scrub when John purchased it. He employed Peter Boyson to develop it and then managed the property. John named his property Bull Jarrah. Here he fattened up and sold mostly Brahman cross cattle. In 2001, John and Sue celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. However, by the next year, John was in the Tully nursing home, where he passed away aged 78. His child bride was by his side. Sue followed her soulmate 4 years later. Tully was extremely lucky to be blessed with this wonderful couple. Thank you.